Today we're going to learn how to checkmate with a king and a rook. Now, one of the things you may notice about this king right here is that there's 8 different moves available. Now, of course, if it's put in one of the sides right there, and we'll move black real quick here, now you'll notice instead of 8 moves, there are 5 moves available. And let's say we take it to the far corner. Now, if you'll notice, with white, there's still 5 moves. Of course, if we put it in the very, very far corner, right there, you're going to notice that white now only has 3 moves available. Why is that important? Well, if there's pieces and stuff around it, that means it can't move very far. So there's not as many options. So now let's get to the point of how to check or how to get a checkmate. One of the things you need to do is draw black's king to the end using the rook, which we'll look at here. If you'll notice, black's king cannot move forward because of the rook controls. So this rook right here controls basically these 2 lines right here. We use it as controlling a line, but we can't just simply go check because now black's king can go forward, so we would check again. Oops, right there. So basically what we want to do is we want to drive black's king to one of these corners here, slowly using a combination of king and rook. This would be the most common setup in an open game. As you can see, black's king is giving us problems here. So now we're going to take this rook and we're going to move it to the right side, protected by the king, of course, looking to seal off black king's options here. So we're going to move it all the way over here. We're basically keeping the black king from being able to move to the right side of the board. And of course, black's king is going to try to get out of the way. And yeah, we're basically looking at how a very tough player would play this. So what we need to do is we need to drive him all the way out of the way. So we got to move our rook again. So how basically do we move them over? Well, what we need to do is we need to get the king basically lined up with black's king. So in this case right here, what we'll do is we'll go 1 back, and we'll wait for black's king to do something here. Black's king decides to go this way. And we get lucky right here. Black's king decides to go even with white's king right here. You see now there's no way black's king can go to the right. All we do is we take the rook and move him back. And now black's king can only go 3 steps back right there. We basically have to do that the whole way to get him to checkmate. So sometimes if you're playing against a tough player, this can be a tedious process here, as black would play very tough. But basically, let me move this down here. Now black can move to the corner there, and then we just move the rook all the way to the end, waiting for black to do something. Let's say black goes back here. Okay, now we can take the rook and we can put him in check. Now black only has 3 options. They have to go backwards. We can move the king forward, and then we'd repeat the same process again. But let's say, for simplicity's sake, we get lucky here, and black goes right here. Okay, simply all we need to do in this spot now, we have this rook. We need to move it to b7. Right there, there's a check. Now black only has 3 options. And we basically have to do the same thing here, where we need to get black trapped, where it's basically facing the king right here. And then the rook would go to a7, and that would block that would basically put black's king in check and block all of its ways to get out. So sometimes it can take quite a while to checkmate with the king, and the rook because you got to get the other king isolated. Here we're going to take a look at a couple things maybe not to do. Let's go ahead and move the rook there. That's a check. Yeah, so that would be a thing you wouldn't necessarily want to do in that spot because you could checkmate here. We're going to take a look at another thing. It's called a stalemate, and I'm going to show you how to try to avoid that. It's basically when black's king is in check and they cannot move. And we're going to keep moving the rook down here as white. Oops, wrong one there. But let's say they go to the corner here. Okay, so, all right, so black's king is in the corner right here. We've got a rook position, actually right where we wanted. Now, if you'll notice, every square that black's king can move is covered by this rook right here, okay? So, if white doesn't move the rook and decides to move its king somewhere, any one of these squares actually, well, anyone that's protecting the rook, because otherwise black can take the rook. Let's say if white goes, well, actually either way would be stalemate. So let's say white goes right here. It's a draw. So it's basically stalemate. Now, of course, if white actually moved his king out of the way and stopped protecting the rook, then black could take with the king. And it would be a draw as well in that situation, as neither side could win. Getting a checkmate with a king and a rook in a game with a lot of pieces can also happen as well. The key thing is to control squares. If you'll notice the king right here, white's king cannot move. But it also controls, and I'm going to have white move its piece here just to give you a demo here. It also controls a couple squares. If you'll notice, black's king can only move 2 squares, both F8 and D8. Those are the only 2 options for black. Let's say black doesn't go there and instead decides to attack with his rook right here, exchange pieces. Let's move the rook down right there, looking to exchange with white, or basically take away white's rook. White can actually win the game in this spot because black only has those 2 options, if you remember. Black's got the king guarding the other ones. All white has to do is take the rook and go to H8, and it's game over, checkmate. White wins in spite of being down by a ton of material. Okay. We got a final example here of how to checkmate with the king and rook. If you'll notice, black's king right now only has 2 options, the D3 and the F3 squares. So if black gets a little careless and decides to go for, let's say, white's rook with the knight right here and goes to A7, well, even though black is winning in material, black has made a huge mistake in that they're going to allow this rook right here to combine with the king for a check, and that's going to be the game right there. And that is going to wrap this up. If you're looking for more chess, there are 3 different playlists on this channel containing lots of chess videos. You can find those with a link in the description below, or you can check the playlist out on this channel. Thanks for watching, and good luck.